In 1978, just as the Sex Pistols and the Clash were winding down and many people deemed punk as dead, a radical punk band by the name of Crass emerged and released the EP Feeding of the 5000. The band hoped to initially sell 100 copies, but the pressing plant they used would only print a minimum of 5,000, hence the title. Crass were astounded to sell all 5,000 independently and go to a second pressing. Quickly, the band gained a following so vast that they became leaders of their own splinter genre of punk, labelled anarcho-punk. Since, Feeding of the 5000 has hit gold status, and Crass's legacy has gone on to influence numerous other bands as well as a number of protest movements. Despite Crass's success and significance in music history, their work in the anarcho-punk movement as a whole is often overlooked. A scholar wrote, "Crass have been airbrushed out of punk histories." Today on Way Out Radio, we're going to shed light on Crass's impact on the UK punk scene of 1977 to 1984. Welcome to Way Out Radio Episode 5, Crass Special, featuring an exclusive interview with band drummer and founder Penny Rimbaud. I'm just going to let it play. I mean, yeah, there's so much I could say, but the man really needs no introduction. Just listen to his wise words. I was blown away by this interview. I love it. Enjoy.
Yeah, I know, this phone's absolute crap.
So how did the song Big A Little A come about?
Oh, you mean what was its source?
Yeah.
I really don't know. I mean, it's sort of very much within the sort of field that we always operated. It was unusual in the sense that it had two very distinct sections. One which sort of, was a critique of what was going on in the world, particularly, quoting each of the sort of the Prime Minister and the Queen and God and all the rest of it. And then it went into a sort of, like semi, sort of slightly reggae style second half, which was basically, giving a few tips on what you might be able to do about it, like turning off the TV. So it was unusual in that respect, in the sense that it sort of had those two parts. And I don't think there was any sort of particular genesis. Nothing particularly inspired it, beyond the fact that, we were attempting to make people's lives better, and anything I wrote was aimed at that, basically.
Okay.
So, sorry, I can't offer you anything more imaginative on that, but, to some extent, producing songs was, obviously, they were felt, but, it was almost tantamount to a job, with the band, keeping the stuff flowing, keeping, expressing the things we wanted to express. And I just, 7 years of songwriting, basically. And some of the...
By that point, had you already been writing for 7 years?
No, I mean, I've been writing all my life, but I mean, in terms of writing songs for the band, I mean, how long... that was about 2 or 3 years in, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah, it was 81.
As far as I remember, yeah. At that time, the other members of the band were increasingly not writing very much, which is why I ended up, I think, writing something like 70%, 60-70% of, the lyrics for the band, because the rest of the band seemed to dry up rather as we sort of went on. So, obviously, certainly for about 3 or 4 years in the band, I was certainly the main songwriter, which meant I was at it a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was really interesting about it, because obviously punk is quite simple musically, because everyone was learning to play as they went. But lyrically, it's very cleverly put together. In the way it's kind of presented like a theatre, where Steve's taking on all these different characters and making a real mockery of them. It's quite nice, but it's also framed by the reality of sort of the kids in the playground, and then it comes back to, be who you want to be. It's quite nice. Yeah. So did it take you long to write, or was it just complete?
Well, I don't think it took particularly long to write. I mean, to sort of orchestrate it, work out how I wanted it to be. The arrangement is mine as well, largely. I knew how I wanted my songs to sound, and that was sort of very much enforced by, years of doing sort of avant-garde theatre and electronics and all sorts of things. I mean, the band was very informed by past experiences. And I think in that sense, Crass were quite unusual in adding sort of, a lot of different, if you like, genres into what we were doing. I mean, I personally, had spent, most of my formative years listening to jazz and classical music, with...
I think that comes through in the sort of the grooves that you choose on songs like Do They Owe Us a Living? Sort of sometimes you're hearing this really hard-hitting punk, gravelly sound, and then in the background you got this and you're thinking, wow, I didn't even realise that's influenced by jazz.
Well, I mean, everything we did was sort of like... in the sense of sort of like picking up on it being a sort of theatre, and I mean it was. I mean, I regarded the entire band as theatre. If we went out, when we went out playing, it was a piece of theatre, which included a punk band. But there'd be films and banners, and they were pretty massive events if we had enough space to put them on. And, the band was only very much a part of the whole show, it wasn't as most, certainly in pop music and rock and roll, the band is the show, well, we never saw it like that, our attitude was very much, no, this is a whole event, and the people in the audience are very much a part of that event as we are being on the stage, so how do we make this work? And the incorporation of all sorts of influences, coming from me at least, was, based around my own love of, much more expressive music than most pop or rock and rollers.
Yeah.
I was interested in trying to create, and succeeding most of the time, atmospheres. So, like in a song like the Mara Hindley song, trying to create a menacing, frightening atmosphere into which, the story of Mara Hindley could be written on, or like in Rival Tribal Rebels, where which was sort of like a mild criticism, piss take of sort of skinhead culture, using sort of cocky, flamboyant sort of sounds, et cetera, et cetera. So we certainly didn't follow the traditions of chorus, verse, chorus of rock and roll. And also, our music, well, directed by me at least, the music was always towards trying to create atmospheres, trying to just as much tell the story in the sort of music as we were in the words.
I think that's where a lot of bands go wrong, when they start to believe that they are their character that they embrace on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They become sort of very mono-directional, and they come
ever
sort of parody.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I just finished that. I think so many bands just become parodies of themselves very quickly.
Yeah.
For exactly the reason you're saying. Yeah, they do.
Did you ever find it difficult when you were sort of at your peak? Did you find yourself start believing the hype?
No, not at all. I mean, other people in the band might have done. I certainly didn't. No, I mean, it was really of no consequence or interest. I mean, we weren't in it for the same reasons that many bands are within that sort of genre. I mean, I wasn't in the slightest bit interested in being, a rock star and anything else. I just was interested in sharing ideas, and that's, been consistent throughout my life, and it was the same before Crass. We had a big outfit called Exit, and we were much more radical than Crass were in many respects. And, again, it was just the passing on of ideas. Anyone could join the band, and anyone did. It was a, very free, it was very sort of 60s, early 70s thing. I neither believed nor disbelieved the hype. I mean, it was just, joke, really, to me.
Yeah.
That he had nothing to offer that was, of any consequence.
Okay. Um, well, I was just wondering, like, what was it like? Because I know that you and Steve originally started the band. What did it feel
Yeah.
like when punk first sort of came out, and did that give you an excitement that you wanted to be a part of?
No, not that I wanted to be a part of. That would sort of suggest, no, I didn't. I mean,
Okay.
so you mean that there was a sort of, the sort of Pistols and those people who sort of slightly preempted us?
Mm.
Yeah, I like the music. I thought it was good rock and roll. And initially I was slightly taken in by what was being said. I thought, yeah, this sounds radical. This sounds like they mean it. I mean, I pretty soon realised, that it was all very much within the framework of rock and roll, and actually they didn't really mean it. But initially I was, pretty excited. I mean, possibly more excited by people like Patti Smith and
Yeah.
television, some of the
Yeah.
American art bands.
Mm.
But no, I mean, there's no question that people like the Pistols created a platform, that which we made use of.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, I was excited by some of the music. I mean, partly because, I think the Pistols, for one, were a very, very good rock and roll band. I mean, politically they were crap, but
Mm.
in the sense that they didn't follow through and they didn't really mean it, man. But,
Okay.
that's by the way, really. But, to say they weren't in some way sort of, an inspiration or a help in the direction of thinking, yeah, we can do this, but we can do it better. We can actually mean it and get on with it. We can turn this into something positive rather than something which is really rather destructive.
Yeah, I like what you were saying there about like Patti Smith and television and this sort of like art element to their
Mm.
music. And
Mm.
one of the things I noticed a lot in Crass records is that you have loads of different clips of different things. Like you might have a news clip or static,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
much like a sound collage.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. Yeah,
and
yeah,
it feels like almost listening to a fanzine. Was that
yeah, yeah.
intentional?
Well, not that it sounded like a fanzine, but I mean, again, it was just part of our sort of bricolage, which I think is the usual term used for such stuff. It's just anything goes. I mean, nowadays it could probably be regarded as sort of mildly postmodernistic. We'd use anything. I mean, I'd just as much use a sort of riff from Benjamin Britten's War Requiem as I might, something that Elvis had done, and it was pretty much like that. Everything's up for grabs. Let's use it. So and really always the thing behind it: how can we make this as powerful as we, are able? How do we do it? How do we make this something which shouts in your face? And from the design side, of the covers and everything, to the production side, we just, we were throwing down the gauntlet, really, to ourselves and to anyone else who wanted to follow up. I mean, it was simply make the best use of this chance and let's go for it, really.
Yeah.
And, the atmosphere was right at the time, I mean, it might have happened anyway, but I think the social atmosphere, the political atmosphere was right for that sort of thing to happen. In much the same way as in the years of the Beatles, it was right for that to happen.
Yeah.
Except I think these are it isn't the individual bands that create the circumstances. It's the sort of social atmospheres which demand really that someone stands up and does something. And people seem to. There's always someone standing up and doing what the social requirement is, and we happen to be that for a period.
So would you say, even though you were influenced by like avant-garde and jazz and other people in the band were influenced by music, it wasn't the music of the time that inspired you, it was more that inspiration was in the social and political context?
Yeah, I would definitely. I mean, most certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, how can I use this situation? I mean, it's sort of like looking at oneself and saying, well, how can I use this situation to have as great an effect, towards a sort of positive world and a positive thinking, as possible, and that's where we came in on that. I mean, I nowadays write aphorisms which are, again, aimed at the same thing, to offer positive a positive view on the world, and the same effort to try and make a better world, which come over, much more like Buddhism than punk. But, the intention's just the same. The intention is, let's all get together and, shake this all up a bit. We don't have to accept the given rules.
Yeah.
And Crass, definitely did that in the sense of their music. They basically said, well, we're not accepting the given rules of punk, which is 3 chords and smash, smash, smash. We actually brought in all sorts of strange, often worrisome elements, from poets to jazz drums or, as you say, the sort of collage of radio clips, etc., etc. Anything to broaden the front, really.
Somebody said that you used pots and pans in the recording of Big A, Little A. Is that
true?
Yeah,
we did actually. Yeah. Well, we were sort of, as I remember it, I wanted to add, we did that sort of semi-reggae rhythm. I mean, we obviously can't do reggae. It's an art form in itself. But
it's got rapping as well. Quite impressive.
Yeah, it was meant to just have that sort of aspect. And I remembered hearing reggae bands which, do use those sorts of sounds. I mean, this was pre-computers. I mean, like pre-digital. So you had to find things, and I think we still got a saucepan. I think it's our stainless steel saucepan in the kitchen. But then I just thought, oh no, that's the one, because we'd used saucepans with the band, Exit, which was the band I had before.
Yeah.
We used to use any old junk. I mean, I didn't have a drum kit for a long time with it, so I just used to use an amplified bicycle wheel, which was great because we got all the different folk sounds.
I've heard about this actually. How did that work?
What, the bike wheels?
Yeah, how did you record
it was just a bike wheel with a pickup mic attached to it. I'm not sure that's exactly the right expression, but it's a mic. It's a very similar mic to people cellists use or violinists use, and that was just gaffer taped onto the rim. And then I used to tune up. I used to tune up these spokes in the same way as when you tighten spokes on a wheel.
Oh,
so I could sort of tune it. I mean, I never tuned it to anything formal, but I did used to sometimes tighten them up. Sometimes they got rattly and we did that with a lot of things. We just used to stick little pickup mics, I think they were called, and we just used to stick them on anything. I mean, if we turned up somewhere there was a really nice iron railing, say, running off the stage, we'd use that as a drum kit for the night sort of thing. I mean, that was the general sort of way of going about it.
Oh, okay. Back to sort of the sound collages and things, what I liked, what I was interested in at the start of Big A, Little A was obviously the children are chanting the original nursery rhyme. Is that significant to you, or something from your childhood, or just something you felt people would latch onto?
I like the idea of innocence, the innocence of the song being used in a sort of slightly sinister context. I mean, obviously it was a game I used to play when I was a kid. The street games were much more common back then in the 50s.
Or was that a game?
It was a game.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Okay.
It was a bit like tag or whatever. In fact, I couldn't for the life of you remember how to play it, but yeah, it was part of the game. And also creating those sort of resonances, the resonances of childhood. It was sort of reminding people of innocence, if you like, and then ploughing in on all the things that have effectively, limited or, buried that innocence. I don't think we ever lose our innocence, but it gets buried in all the sort of considerations of adulthood and lost. And it's a hard job to regain it, but so it was sort of more about that. It was, all the kids on it were living here. They were all the kids of the various parents within the band, and it was nice to include them as well, because generally speaking, we'd all go off to the studio, and the kids would go off to school or whatever else they were doing, or hang around with someone who was looking after them here whilst we were all working, and it was really nice to incorporate all of them. I think I can't remember whether the girl, I think she wasn't there. But anyway, it was the the 3 young boys who were living here with their parents, and who were part of the band. So, and that was a nice thing, because it meant they were part of something we were doing, rather than just sort of seeing us wandering off to work every day.
Okay. So that melody that's used for that phrase in the song, is that the original, or did Crass make that one up?
It's probably based around the old nursery rhyme, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I don't remember. I mean, as you know, nursery rhymes, they vary. I mean, you can have a street game which will have a totally different tune in Rotherham to Newcastle. But, basically the, it was probably how I remembered, playing that game when I was a kid. I don't know. I really couldn't say. But, I mean, so it could very well be as it was, or... But yeah, so that was the very, nursery rhyme, really.
Okay. So when you say the system might get you, but it won't get me, what does the word system really encapsulate for you?
Well, system really. We used to use the term system. Black culture uses the man.
Yeah.
It means, those who like to think they have authority over our lives, from bankers to vicars to parents to school teachers to just about every bugger who likes to think that they can tell you, me, and all the rest of us how to live our lives. The system is everything but ourselves, almost. The system is what's out there. And the first step of freeing oneself from it is realising that that's going on, that actually you don't have to listen, you can form your own views, you don't need to have a god with a beard, you can create your own gods, maybe you don't want one at all, whatever the choice is, that's the exciting thing about being a human being.
Yeah.
Anything that inhibits that is part of the system, in my view. I can't remember what they call it in The Cuckoo's Nest, but it's a great expression. I can't remember, but anyway, it's something. The film, but... Yeah, well, they use again, for the system, meaning the mental institution, the politicians, everything that exists, which is controlling their lives, is given a sort of similar, genetic term to cover the whole picture. So that's what I meant. We meant, and I meant by the system.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I sort of obviously got it, but then when you're writing about it, you have to have a specific...
sure, it's good to have it. Yeah, no, absolutely.
That was a really good answer.
Good.
This is something Steve said, actually, when I asked him about the song. He said that he remembers you running off in rehearsal to write these lyrics, and you wrote them really quickly in about 20 minutes, and you said to him that you could imagine a Glaswegian punk singing them. Do you remember any of that?
Always... I don't remember that exactly that. Steve's got quite a memory, but what I do remember is, I did have a model Glaswegian punk in my mind throughout the 7 years that we were on the road, rehearsing, writing, in the studio, whatever we did, whilst we were existing as Crass, whilst I was Crass. My own personal identity was sort of put aside for that. And I always kept it in mind, this idea of a young Glaswegian without really much, finance, probably, very undereducated, victim of circumstances and birth. And I always used to have that kid was a model for me, and I would think, well, what would a young kid up in in those days, the Goebbels still. Gorbals, I would never have Gorbals. Terrible slum housing, and that's where this kid lived in my mind. And I just used to think, well, what would he think about this? It was like a meter. I'd come from a pretty comfortable and reasonably wealthy background, and it's too easy for me to not really look at, the sort of street realities. That was one of the great things of, having Steve as a sort of work partner, is that we could, he brought the sort of wisdom of the street into my life, you know, so that we get that, so we could talk a very dual way. I mean, I could talk about another sort of part of society and use that other part of society, you know, against itself, actually, largely, but, you know, using privileged education against privileged education, which is, you know, what someone like probably George Orwell would, you know, claim to have done the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did. I just had this model in my mind. Would this Glaswegian punk be going on a holiday in Benidorm? No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't be able to afford it, etc. etc. Well, I won't. So I was. He was sort of like a regulator for me, really. Am I getting a bit cocky? Yes, I am. You know, etc. etc. So it was a sort of very good way of just having a little idea in the back of my head to sort of keep me online, really.
So it's kind of like a target audience.
No, it wasn't a target audience, you know, because the audience would vary massively. What he was just one little individual who I didn't want to let down.
Oh, right, okay.
You know, I didn't want him. You know, it was important to me not to let people down like that. I didn't want to do some shit thing that just because I hadn't thought about it clearly enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Whatever it was, going and buying a pair of boots I didn't need, or, you know, all sorts of things in those days. We were very sort of, you know, I think we always were very, you know, we very much limited our you know, personal lives, you know, to with this sort of concept of the whole. You know, if one's going to start sort of talking about revolutionary hardships, then you've got to live those revolutionary hardships. You can't be sort of preaching revolution from the swimming pool. You know, you've got to live it and be it. You know, and I think we did do that, and you know, and I continue to do it in my own way. Yeah,
definitely. So, were you all a part of decorating the halls and making banners and things like that all the way through?
Yeah.
So, what were the main things that you wanted to change, like socially and politically? Did you want to bring people together? And I know there was sort of a fight against war and a fight against for animal rights and things like that.
Yeah, well, everything really. I mean, you name it. Everything which, you know, prevailed against human decency.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, you know, we were no more specifically pacifist than we were feminist. No more specifically feminist than we were, you know, animal rights-ist.
Yeah.
Or good foodists or whatever. You know, I mean, it was whatever sees you through the night, really. I mean, it was, it was an all-out assault, really, on, well, you know, as far as an all-out, it was on everything. There wasn't anything, nothing was left untouched, really. I mean, I hope, you know, it was an all-out attack on everything within what I described as the system, you know, earlier on.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we weren't specific about it.
Okay. So.
I mean, we were specific on one thing, and that was, you know, the catchphrase, there is no authority but yourself. In other words, make up your own fucking mind, you know, I mean.
Yeah.
This is how we see it. Don't take this as gospel. Yeah. This is how we see it. And everything I think we did used to turn to that. Well, this is how we see it, but don't just take it for granted. You check it out yourself, you know.
Yeah.
You be your own authority. We really were aware of not wanting to preach. I mean, I know we come over as preaching on occasions, but that was always countered by some bit of humour, or it was countered by, you know, basically saying, well, you know, don't listen to us, listen to yourself, you know.
Yeah.
So that was the key, really, of anything. It was, there is no authority to yourself. In other words, get your own life. Make your own life, you know, and, you know, it's not for us to be critical about where you take it. You make your own life.
Yeah. Well, it obviously worked because Crass had a huge influence over a load of other bands afterwards.
Yeah. And more importantly than the bands, really, I think it had a huge influence on our whole culture, you know, whether it was writing or everything. I think that, it did work. And that's because within it, you know, there was a sort of for want of a better word, and I always use it rather guardedly, you know, sort of spiritual message, you know. That spiritual message was, you know, that there's goodness inside you, but pursue it.
Yeah.
You know, it was never worded exactly like that, but I mean, the number of people who could see that and understood that that's actually what we were trying to say was, you know, very, you know, warming. I'm very pleased that people were aware that that's what we were trying to do, you know, to promote kinship, love, you know, all those rather old-fashioned ideas.
Do you ever keep an eye out now and hope that another band might come along that will make you feel...
No, it doesn't worry me. I mean, other bands have come along, you know, and do come along, but, you know, I've never confined it in any case to one genre. I mean, there's plenty of writers around, there's plenty of philosophers around, there's plenty of scientists around. I mean, if one wants, I mean, you could almost say that sort of quantum physics are the sort of new punk, you know, they really are. I mean, if you want exciting ideas, go quantum. I mean, it's fucking crazy stuff, you know. That's, so I've never limited myself to thinking or expecting, you know. There are people who sort of say, oh, well, nothing's happening, you know, because all they're doing is, you know, watching MTV and checking out what, you know, X Factor or something. Of course nothing's happening. Go and have a look to see what's happening in the scientific world. You know, these things come and go, you know, there's leaders. You know, it's all ultimately philosophy, and sometimes the philosophy comes strongly from a rock band, sometimes it comes strongly from a physicist, sometimes it comes strongly from a healer. So, you know, you never know where anything's going to come from. You know, so I don't look that way. I don't, you know, and ultimately, you know, if it isn't there, then that's why isn't it there? Because I'm not doing it. If I sort of think something's not there, I do it. You know, it might not become a sort of, you know, next week's bestseller or anything. I don't care. It's not consequence. What's important is that's missing, I'll do it.
Yeah.
It's like bread. You know, you run out of bread, what do? You make some more.
Yeah.
Well, if you're running, if you think, not you, if one thinks that, you know, we're lacking something in the world, well, fucking do something about it. You know, like that's what you do in your own home, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, the fire doesn't make itself. Well, neither does society. We make society. Well, why don't we take responsibility for that?
So,
you know,
when you got quite a big response, well, like probably the biggest response you could get by Parliament discussing Crass, did you feel shocked or did you expect it to come along?
Well, I mean, we knew that we were being, you know, we were under surveillance from MI5 and MI6 throughout. I mean, it was, you know, patently obvious that we were. So, you know, it was no real surprise, no. And, I mean, it was, no, would I say it was reward? Yeah, I was pleased. I mean, I was pleased in the sense that, yeah, well, it's getting through. It means we were doing our job well.
So were they spying on you or something?
Huh?
Were they, like, spying on you? How did you know?
Of course, sure.
Really?
And our phones were tapped, our mail was opened. Probably, you know, one or two of the people who turned up to do fanzine interviews were actually undercover. I mean, for certain, they knew what we were up to, you know, and we were a threat. So, great, you know, I mean, it's pleasing to me because, you know, their surveillance indicated to me that we were actually achieving our aims. I mean, if no one had taken any interest in me, in politics, if no one had taken any interest in the secret services, then, you know, we wouldn't have been doing our job. If we were a threat.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking revolution. Well, you expect to have MI5 snooping. And if you don't, then you've actually not really managed it. You're not doing the job. So when that all happened, you know, the feeling, you know, it's a mixed feeling. Because it's not very nice getting into all that deep shit, but, you know, and it's dark and it's dangerous as well. But, you know, it genuinely is physically dangerous. But on the other hand, there's the elation of saying, you know, we're having an effect. You know, and it wasn't meaning, you know, we as a band, you know, we as a movement, you know, we can do it. You know, the kid in Glasgow is going to think, fucking hell, yeah. Well, it's happening.
Definitely.
I thought we were meant to wait until someone told us we were allowed. It's happening. You can do it. And that's what we were trying to demonstrate. You can fucking do it. And we did demonstrate it.
Yeah. So with everything being like so in-house and the whole movement,
Yeah.
how were you distributing your music? Were you going to the shops like physically, like
No,
some?
no, no. I mean, by very quickly. Initially we were distributed by Rough Trade,
All right.
and then actually we set up our own distribution outfit, which became the longest lasting independent distribution company besides Rough Trade, and still exists in a different form. But the distribution company of Southern, still exists, and it was in independent terms, it's massive.
Yeah.
No, we. Well, I mean, it's exactly what we were saying. If it isn't there, make it. So we made a record label, and when we found we hadn't really got the sort of distribution we wanted, okay, what do? You make a distribution company, et cetera, et cetera. And it turned into a sort of mini empire within alternative terms. And large lumps of it still exist today. Still operating.
So with the single like Nagasaki Nightmare,
Yeah.
which had Big A Little A on the B side,
Yeah.
do you know how like a ballpark figure for the distribution of that, or how many?
You mean how many we sold?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I know we sold something like 20,000. Wow, hang on. I think we sold 20,000 within the first week, which is why it went into the charts. I think it was in at about 16. The next week,
UK charts.
yeah, and the next week it wasn't in at all, which meant we'd been bought out because we'd sold an awful lot more.
Wow.
And I know anyway, 20,000 was a lot of records to move in a week.
So
we came. Sorry, go on.
So were you removed from the charts, sort of censored?
Yeah, there's no question of it. I mean, we weren't even in the top 100 the next week. Well, I mean, that's just not possible. Sorry, I mean,
yeah.
Because we'd sold more records. Once you get into the higher bits of the charts, you start, it's incremental. It just starts growing. It's sick, that's in the charts. We buy that, because that's how that sort of industry works. And there's no question that, just as the big companies can buy themselves into the charts, so they can buy people like us out of the charts. I've got no doubt about that.
Yeah. Okay. I've just got two more questions.
Okay.
One of them is about the song about the Roxy gig.
Oh yeah.
Band from the Roxy.
Yeah.
So, what happened the night at the Roxy? If you can remember any of it.
What, when they turned us off?
Yeah.
Well, we turned up. We were booked to play there, and I can't remember the band. It was a band called the Bears or something, I think, or the other band. Anyway, on that evening, there was a load of Jimmy Percy followers turned up, who were meant to be sort of, righty, skinheady types, which weren't at all. They were charming, slightly roughneck, but great, I mean, good audience. It was a fucking great audience. And, we were all completely slaughtered. I mean, those days we used to drink rather a lot when we were performing because we were shit scared, and I know I was completely out of my head. Anyway, we started, and it was going really well, and, the place was fucking heaving. I mean, it was absolutely packed, and it was like a sort of, huge amount of, pogoing. I mean, it was like the sort of modern pits, really. It was very, very wild indeed. And that was fairly new then. I mean, it was sort of like, what was that, 77, I mean, that sort of stuff hadn't really started to become quite ordinary. I mean, most of it, if you look at the sort of early films of sort of the Pistols, for example, there's not much going on in the audience. People are sort of standing there, jumping around a bit, but they're not gone fucking wild. It was, and it was beginning to happen by 77. Anyway, the people who ran the Roxy were actually hoods, I think. They just didn't like what we were doing, so they didn't like seeing this happen. We were taking it over in a way, and so they came over and pulled the speakers in. I kept playing, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a very good article I wrote about it, which is in International Anthem. What the fuck was well, yeah, I don't know whether you read that, but that sort of covers the entire story, you know, rather well. Described. I don't know whether you'd even be able to find a copy of International Anthem. Anyway, it was the first volume of the first, you know, edition, first whatever of International Anthem, which was, well, you know, the newspaper that G did. Might be able to get one off of her. I don't know. Go up on Exit Stencil Press site. Have you ever been up on that?
Yeah. Okay. I'll have a look.
Oh, I'll have a look and see whether she might have some. I don't know. Okay. Anyway.
So did everyone make it home safe?
What?
Did everyone make it home safe?
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember now. I mean, when Eve and myself went down there about a couple of weeks after, we were just, you know, up in town, and we thought, oh, let's go down to Roxy, and, you know, they actually threw us out.
Really?
Yeah, we were sitting at the bar down there, and a guy came up and said, I fucking know you, don't you? I said, no, you don't know me, mate. And he said, yes, I fucking do. You know, and so we were, you know, like, thrown out. And I don't know whether it was my imagination. I don't think it was, actually. You know, you see those films when people are walking down the street and a fucking car starts coming up behind them, you know, to give them a runner. Well, that happened with us, and whether or not it was just some arsehole or whether it was anything to do with the people in the club, I don't know. But anyway, it did happen in Neal Street, where the place was. But, yeah, so, yeah, it was sort of all, yeah, it was a wild evening. Good.
Okay. Well, I think that Crass have had like a real lasting influence on music and on the way people view things. I mean, obviously, like from the hippie culture as well that went before it, people have started to think more freely, and other people haven't. But what would you say like is the legacy of Crass?
Well, I think almost just what you said. Really, I mean that's legacy is that you can do it if you're willing to try. But you know, we each in our own way, you know, have got value. You know, we only need to find how to use that value. We each in our own way have got talent, beauty, all the things that, you know, are very human attributes, and you know, they're so sort of masked over by the sort of culture we live in. They're so suppressed in a way, and yet it's there, you know, the spark of joy, the spark of love are always deep in us, you know. And I think the legacy in Crass was, well, actually, you know, everything in the world is attitude. Change your fucking attitude. You know, the first way of changing the world is to change your attitude to it. And once you've done that, then you can start moving. But if you're going to sort of be a victim to the world, which is how, you know, we're taught to be, then you can't change it. You know, and you know, even if it's just a tiny, you know, maybe your change in the world is going to be window boxes in your street. Great. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If everyone's doing the thing they can do, the revolution's over.
Yeah.
You know, because that is the revolution. The revolution isn't men behind guns. The revolution is people saying, "Yeah, I can fucking do that."
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we reclaim the world. I mean, not just Britain; it's the world. That's how we reclaim the world, with our feet, not with lots of sort of clever Marxist ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I think. I mean, I know that you've done so much in your life outside of Crass, and obviously everything is equally as important, but when I put on a Crass record, then it makes me feel like I'm not on my own, like I don't have to take it lying down, and it's just kind of like, we'll have a go back at them, sort of stand up for yourself. So I just wanted to say, like, thanks for that, because it's helped me through so much.